Good afternoon, YouTube. Alright guys, so today is the day I want to do a video including the race car. So if you remember from my introduction to the race car video, I had mentioned that I cannot take it drifting because the power steering cuts in and out. And I do believe it could be a bad rack and pinion or bad pump. So what I had intended to do was I got a replacement rack and pinion from a buddy of mine and a whole bunch of parts to rebuild it. Or just recondition it, you know, new inner, outer tie rods, boots, stuff like that. And I'm basically going to install that rack in there and take my old one out. Probably install a power steering cooler and see if that fixes the problem. And if not, then I will change the pump. The reason why I'm not changing the pump right away is because I kind of feel that the rack and pinion's tired anyways because it's had a lot of abuse. And I already got another one, and it's easier to just go ahead and have one ready to go, just take it out, put it back in, and call it a day. And at least I know that is new and everything, well, as new as it can be, because the rack and pinion's used. But so that's my plan of attack for that. So basically, that's what I am going to show you today, is if you have a second-hand rack and pinion, how to clean it up and service it and replace all the parts on it and everything like that, so you can get it ready to go into your vehicle. Alright, so what we have in front of you guys, this is everything that we're going to be working with today. So we have our S13 rack and pinion that my buddy gave me that is in dire need of a cleanup and some parts replaced. It is fully functional, it's just in pretty bad shape. It was pulled out of his car years ago and it's just been sitting in a parts bin waiting for me to get time to get to it. We have some new inner tie rods, we have some new outer tie rods, we have some new tie rod bellows or boots, whatever you want to call them. And then we have some energy suspension bushings to install it into the S13. So yeah, this is everything that I need to get this done, and then we'll do the install video. So I'm going to swap this into my S13 like I've previously mentioned, and install a power steering cooler. And I may use this, I don't know yet, this is an oil cooler from a Saab. I'm not sure if it's too large for a power steering cooler, I really don't know. I just have it lying around in the parts bin. I may use it, I may not. If you think it's too big for a power steering cooler, please comment down below. Let me know, because it would be nice if I can use it because it's free, because I already have it, which means I either got it or bought it at some point in the last 20 years. Alright, so yeah, I'm going to get some things set up so I can start cleaning this rack and pinion up, and I will bring you guys back. Alright guys, so now that I have this kind of sitting out here on my little drip pan I keep underneath my car, I'm just going to basically start by removing some of these boots, which probably haven't been off in years, but we're going to get these off of here. And we're going to try to clean this thing up, because this thing is just filthy. Alright, so now that I've basted it like a turkey and pretty much just marinated it in cleaning supplies, I'm going to let it sit for a minute. Hopefully the grease is going to get broke down a little bit, and then I'm going to scrub it up and everything like that. So while I let it sit, I'll bring you guys back when I get this all cleaned up. Alright guys, now that the rack and pinion's all cleaned and everything, and you've done successfully degreased it and everything, and it's looking a lot better now, it doesn't look like a big hunk of grease. Basically, we're going to start disassembling it. So if your boots are ripped like mine, it kind of aids you, I guess. But basically, down here, there's this lock ring and everything here. So if you look closely, you will see that there's these little edges right here. You have to bend these up on all these corners, and then this lock ring will be out of the way, and then you can unwrench the inner tie rod out of there. But let's say it's not. You're going to want to get your boots off. So you got a little like hose clamp right down here on your inner tie rod. You're going to remove that and everything. And then on these ones, they have these twist clamps or twist bands. So we're going to go ahead and remove that. Like so. And then pretty much your tie rod boot will slide off and expose your rack. Alright, so now you have your boots off and everything, so the next step is to unbend your lock clip here, and then here on the end here you can fit a wrench, and you're going to put 2 wrenches to basically break the torque on the inner tie rod. So I'm going to get some tools. Alright, so for this you're just going to find whatever method works best for you. But you need to bend these lock tabs up. Alright, so once you get your lock ring up, now you can unscrew the inner tie rod from the rack. On this S14 rack, the rack and pinion 21 fits pretty good, and the tie rod, I'm using 1.25 inches. I'm sure it might be something different, but it should work good enough. And there, you just removed an inner and outer tie rod from your 240SX rack and pinion. Now I'm going to go ahead and do the other side, and I'll bring you back once I get it completed. Alright guys, just for education purposes, if you ever wondered how you tell if your tie rod's bad, so obviously this is bad. One, it's really loose, and it doesn't move freely. If you can see it, doesn't move freely, and the boots are all worn and everything like that. 2, on the inner tie rods, so they should be able to support their own weight. So yeah, when it does that, or it's extremely loose in the joint, they're bad. So just for comparison, if I grab one of these new tie rods, it can support its own weight, and if I push on it, it's really tight. I can't even move it without exerting myself past maximum capacity. Either way, so if you're checking your tie rods, if you take them out of the spindle and they hold themselves up, the inner tie rod is still good. If it slops down, they're getting worn. If it's extremely loose, they're bad. The outer tie rods, if the boots are ripped, you can, and the joint is still tight and firm and smooth, you can put new boots on it, but usually if the boots are ripped, you just replace them. So that's how you check to see if your tie rods are good or bad. Alright, I'm just going to set them both to the same, which is going to be totally off, but this car is going to need an alignment anyways after you do something like this, so it's no worries. There is a way to DIY your own alignment using some jack stands and some fishing string, which is probably what I'll do after I get this all installed, just to make sure the car is fairly straight so I can drive it down and get an alignment. But basically, before we start installing these, these are all sealed boots. They do not have any Zerk fittings or anything. They're non-serviceable. They're meant to be good for as good as they are, and then they're bad. So you just basically run them, and once they wear out or the boots rip, you just replace them. They're inexpensive. These are just factory replacements, nothing fancy. The kit came with cotter pins, new lock nuts for your inner tie rod, and your castle nut for your outer tie rod. So it's pretty nice. The new inner tie rods came with new lock nuts as well, so that's kind of nice. I have extras, but basically, so for installation purposes, what you want to do first is you got to remove your lock nut, and then you need your tie rod boot. It comes with a zip tie. The zip tie is used on the inside against the rack, and then you use the factory clamp on the outside. I've never had any problems using zip ties. They work extremely well for replacing the boots on these, so it's very nice. But basically what you're going to do is you're going to take an inner tie rod and you're going to slide your boot over your inner tie rod like so. So now basically you can, if you were to install your outer tie rod first, you wouldn't be able to get the boot on. So you need to put your boot on before your outer tie rod. Then you need to reinstall your lock nut. And you're just going to run it down pretty far, because your next step is you're going to try to roughly match the length of the new inner and outer tie rod to the old inner and outer tie rod. So what I like to do, not a lot of people do this that I've noticed, and I'm not saying you have to, but I like to put a little bit of anti-seize on these threads, because I don't know how many times I've gone to adjust these, and they are just super hard to break loose or tighten or loose or adjust, so I just put a little bit of anti-seize on the threads, and then you take your outer tie rod and you spin it on. And what I normally do is I spin it on all the way to spread the anti-seize on the tie rod and the inner tie rod so that it all gets coated. And we're going to basically, like I said, we're going to try to match up the lengths of the new with the old just to get a rough estimate. So you can do that however you want. You can set them down like this and then kind of get a judgment of how far or how long or how short you need it to be. You can use a tape measure, whatever you want. Since I know I'm going to need to adjust these, I'm not stressing too much exactly where I want it, where I need it to do. If you're doing this on a car, the best way to do it is to count how many turns it takes to get your outer tie rod off of your inner tie rod. So if this was on a vehicle, I would rotate this 1, 2, 3, 4, and so forth until it is removed, and I would keep a track of how many turns I did, whether it be 16 and a half, 9 and a half, 10 solid, whatever, and then I would spin the new one on the same amount. Another thing you can do is you can break the torque on your lock nut and just snug it enough that you can loosen your outer tie rod, but your lock nut stays where it is, and then you will know roughly how far you need to install your new outer tie rod. But since we're doing both inner and outer, you basically need to eyeball it, measure it, however you want to do it. Try to get it as close to the length of the tie rod you're replacing and everything. Now keep in mind you will need alignment, so there's that. But you can get it pretty close to where it will be minimal change and you can actually drive the car for a few days or whatever until you can get an alignment scheduled. So basically once you have your outer tie rod and your inner tie rod assembled, then you install it onto your rack and pinion. Before we do that, some good things to note is that inside your rack and pinion are these teeth, and that is what basically the gears pull and change and whatnot by spline drive, whatever you want to call it, inside with these teeth, and they're greased up. So what I like to do, since this is going to be kind of like we're doing a little bit of an overhaul, is I'm going to pull this all the way one way, clean the grease off, re-grease it on both sides wherever applicable before I install my new inner outer tie rods and boots. That way it has fresh grease. So yeah, that's basically how it is. I'll bring you back once I get some progress, because there's no point in you really watching me do this, because I just explained what I'm doing. Alright guys, so once you get your tie rod on, and I'm not sure if you can see this or not, but there's a little hole or dimple cutaway in the rack. So once you've installed your outer and inner tie rod assembly with your lock ring, what you do is you're going to stake this lock ring into the little dimple or cutaway on the rack so that it is secure. So you're just going to, I don't know if you can see it, but there's a little cutaway right there, and you're going to stake that down, one there and one on the opposite side, and that will secure your tie rod assembly onto the rack and pinion. So, and then all that's left is basically taking this and attaching it to where it goes and using a zip tie and calling it good. So yeah, that's it at the moment for this side. All I got left is to do the exact same thing on the other side. I already greased it up and cleaned it, so that's good to go. So yeah, I'll bring you back when I get this finished. Alright guys, there's our finished product. We got our new outer tie rod, inner tie rod, new boots, all cleaned up, ready to go. So that is basically everything you need to know about kind of rebuilding. I mean, it's not really a rebuild because we didn't do any internal seals or anything like that, but refreshing your rack and pinion for your S chassis. S13, S14 are going to be very similar, if not exactly the same. The parts may be different between the two, but the process is all the same. This was an S14 rack. It will go in an S13, S13, S14. Just you may need to use the bushings for the rack or the chassis. I can't remember which one. But I know I ordered the bushings to allow this rack to go in my S13, but I can't remember if you use the chassis, so S13 bushings with an S14 rack, or S14 bushings in an S13. Either way, they're interchangeable with just changing the bushings, and that's how you would recondition it, kind of, if you were in a situation like me where you want to change out your tie rods and rack and everything like that. Hopefully this has helped you out if you need to just change your inner and outer tie rods on your S13, S14, S chassis. You know, the process on the car is going to be very similar to the process off the car. Maybe a little more difficult, but yet easier at times because the rack is stationary and installed in the vehicle, and you don't have to try to hold it on your lap while you undo everything. But yeah, that's how it goes. In regard to the lock ring, on this design, on the other design that I'm used to, you slide the lock ring onto the rack, install your inner tie rod, and then once it's tight, you push the lock ring up and then bend the tabs over. On this one, you have to install the lock ring onto the inner tie rod, screw it on. Once it's tight, then you stake the lock ring to the rack. So that's just one thing to note. I showed you how to where to stake it and everything like that, so refer back to that part of the video. But so there may be some differences when you come across depending on vehicles if you're using this for other types of vehicles. But all rack and pinions and tie rods are usually very similar to this process. If this video helped you, and hopefully it did, please like and subscribe. We're going to toss this rack in the race car here shortly. Not exactly sure when. Probably after the concrete and everything settles, so maybe in a couple weeks, because I'm going to pull the Epic fail car in this garage in order to pull the engine, and I don't want to try to swap racks in the other garage. If I get froggy, I may do it. Probably not, but who knows. But I do have some other projects for the race car that I can do while it's in the other garage. Basically, it's going to be some braces, a bumper change, so removing fenders, front bumper, stuff like that may be entertaining and helpful, so please follow along, and thanks for watching. You guys have a good night.